here with coffee candidates, and we have Peter Barca, who's running for the first Congressional District for Wisconsin. And we have Heather Asiambi, my partner in crime, the co-founder of Racine County I. We are so glad you're here because, quite frankly, we are so committed to making sure that we have really good conversations with politicians because we kind of feel like we just need to settle in and listen better. Right?
Yeah, there's just not a lot of opportunity to have these one-on-one conversations because so much of it gets lost in noise.
Of course.
And we thought this would be a more productive way to do things instead of doing like a forum, which feels very much like a competition and not a conversation. And so we welcome you. So thank you for being here.
Yes, I appreciate Heather and Denise for having me here. And terrific format, and I look forward to it.
Excellent. So if you just want to introduce yourself to everyone, that's how we'll start.
Terrific. I'm Peter Barca. I grew up in the town of Summers, right between Kenosha and Racine. And I've lived here virtually my entire life, other than being away for school. And love these two communities. I think it's like the best place on earth to live. And, we're shores of Lake Michigan with wonderful parks and very engaged populations of people that care deeply about their communities. And the whole first CD, I think, sort of fits that whole description to some degree. But of course, this is my home. And I started off my career as a teacher. I directed a camp for kids with disabilities. And it was my favorite job of all time because when kids are in an outdoor environment, they lose their inhibitions. So we had kids walk for the first time, talk for the first time.
That's amazing.
And I would have paid them to work there. So that brought me into the education field. I worked with children with severe emotional disturbances. I've been the head of a specialty treatment facility doing that. And then I went back to graduate school. I went more into the employment and training field, helping people who were dislocated workers, adults with disabilities, others that needed retraining to help find meaningful careers. And that was also something very near and dear to my heart. And then I went into the legislature. I was on the campaign committee for my predecessor, and I was very involved in the community. I was on the United Way board. I was on the legislative committee for the city of Kenosha, and I was on a juvenile justice committee for Racine and Kenosha. And so I care deeply about so many issues. And so when my predecessor decided to run for the state senate, I ran and won the assembly seat. And then you had asked me, Denise, and then following that, when Les Aston was appointed Secretary of Defense, I ran and won the congressional provision to make sure that CHIPS engines had to be made in America. That meant that in the Beloit part of the district, they were able to recall nearly 100 people and hire nearly 100 more at Fairbanks Morris. I passed a provision for community health care centers, which was very important. I helped lead the effort on a crime bill that created 100,000 new police officers. So it's and I could, development fund that Secretary Ron Brown, the Secretary of Commerce, who was tragically killed, unfortunately, because economic development was always important to me. We got that through. And so I've always been focused on results and where are the main issues facing the people in our area and our communities, and how can I help? So that's why I'm running for office again, because I feel we have a do-nothing dysfunctional Congress.
That is a lot.
That's a lot. And I could go on from there, frankly, Denise, because then I went into private business. I ran my own business and did a number of other things.
So when you're out knocking on doors, what is the top concern that you're hearing from people, or the thing that they want to talk to you most about?
Well, it's hard to center on one, but clearly the economy is one. Is probably the one I would cite, because I served on the National FEMA Advisory Board during the Obama administration.
Okay.
And during that period, I learned, and this is where I think so many people are having such a tough time, is that 60% of Americans, and now it's up to 63%, cannot survive a $500 hit. So as a consequence, we really need to grow and expand the middle class, and I have a whole agenda around items that I think can accomplish that. But I think, to me, if there was one issue that, and there's not just one issue, because there's a half dozen issues that are vitally important. Everything from healthcare. I heard so many really heart-wrenching stories about people that are dealing with very serious conditions and their insurance isn't fully covering it, and things of that sort. So,
well, it's really complicated, especially here in the city of Racine. You have 10,000 people that don't have a GED. You have 10,000 homes that have either lead pipes or lead paint. That's a significant contributor to learning disabilities, behavioral problems. And as a result, the crime rate is tied significantly to that issue, because when you have learning disabilities and behavioral problems, you don't graduate from high school or college, or and a lot of that school, the prison pipeline
Hmm.
has very much been linked to that. So when you're looking through the lens of this job that you're applying for with the congressional district, how do you kind of address some of that pain point that
Hmm.
people have
Hmm.
around how they're feeding their families and feeding themselves, and your food deserts, and
Right.
you look at the city of Racine, there's no grocery store here.
Hmm.
So those are some of the things that I know people are really telling us that they care a lot about.
Hmm.
So how do you see your role in the federal government
Hmm.
if you get this job? Of what can we do to fix that?
Well, let me cite three things that sort of are related, directly related to this, and I'll answer the broader question. I mean, so let's take lead pipes. I'm very proud of the fact that I was part of reaching a bipartisan agreement in the state legislature. Rob Cowles was really the big hero, Republican senator from Green Bay, who's a friend of mine, and we got extra resources to try and help to deal with that problem. Secondly, I would say that, you know, after I left Congress, I was in charge of the Midwest for the Small Business Administration. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. I ran my own business. And I think it's so important to help foster business growth, and help people to get the resources they need to start a small business, and have access to capital, have technical support that's so desperately needed. And that takes care of food deserts, because if people have the resources, they're more likely to invest. And a realtor that I've been close with always said, well, store tops sell rooftops. So obviously, as we have more development here, in this portion of Racine, naturally, then you'll find store tops that'll follow that. But also, I would say that as a member of Congress, I took seriously that whole issue of how do we build and expand the middle class? How do you help small business to grow and expand? How do you create the environment so people want to invest in communities? Those are all vitally important issues. Even housing is directly related to that. As a
Yeah,
matter
you're
of
right.
fact, I'll never forget after the whole Foxconn issue came up, we had a symposium at Wingspread that I participated in. It was a wonderful effort. Of course, Wingspread does such marvelous programs, and they talked about the fact that there just is not enough worker affordable housing, and so that's
And
another
that's the
issue.
kicker, is the affordable part,
Of
right?
course, of
Yeah, because
course.
we've talked to a couple of people. Like we talked to Chester last week, but we've also spoken with David DeGroot, who's the Mount Pleasant Village president, but he's running against
Hmm.
Greta in 66.
Hmm.
I think hers is
He
still
got there.
the number 66. They've all moved around now. It's hard
Right.
to keep them
Sure.
track
Of
sometimes.
course.
But
No
one of
question.
the things he mentioned is that Mount Pleasant has taken a number of steps to do affordable housing, but it's not ownership, right? These are more like apartment units and things like that. But how and this kind of ties back into inflation, though, also,
Hmm.
is that we're hearing a lot of things about, the Biden Harris administration, and inflation is up
Hmm.
under them and all this. Can you talk about how Congress
Hmm.
actually has a lot more to do with not policy making, but certainly passing laws
Hmm.
that can address some of these things?
Of course, they have a big role, and so does the state. I mean, as a member of the Evers administration, um, we had dedicated $500 million for bonding for affordable housing. That plays a role. But first-time home buyer programs, that's a very important issue. WIDA has had a program like that for a long time. I know that it's being discussed.
But is it
Uh,
funded?
well, you can give credits. Yeah, you need
Yeah,
to fund it.
okay,
You can
yeah.
give credits for people to be able to afford that first time home. I know
Yeah.
the vice president's campaigning on that issue now. Those are all issues that make a difference. But of course, affordability of anything is a key issue. I know that, like for instance, negotiating drug costs, which has helped tremendously for seniors with inhalers and other drugs. And sadly, my opponent voted 3 times against negotiating drug costs. I would certainly make that be a top priority. Credit card fees. I mean, my opponent serves on the Financial Institutions Committee, and he voted to raise credit card fees. I think that's a mistake. That makes it harder for people to make ends meet. And so I think it's, what do you vote for? How do you make sure that your votes are matching up with the needs of the middle class? But there's so many other things you can do. Like for instance, Buy American provisions. I talked about one I helped to pass. Another one I passed in the state legislature. It helped. Mark McCann actually took the lead. was on call centers to make sure call centers were located right here in America. And that changed things so that whether it's a DNR or DMV, that call centers can't be overseas. Well, it helps to create good paying jobs. Change these disastrous trade deals that have deindustrialized America. You go across Racine and Kenosha, places where there were vibrant, manufacturing facilities that paid family supporting wages, they're no longer there. And a large part of that is because of these disastrous trade deals. I led the effort against NAFTA, against the president of my own party, because I knew it would lead to this kind of
NAFTA has
deindustrialization.
definitely been like, and you see it because, and I don't know, I used to write for the Milwaukee Business Journal and I used to cover manufacturing. That was my beat, right?
Yes.
And Wisconsin is usually first or second in the highest amount of manufacturing in the entire United
Right,
States.
proportion to
So,
our population.
and it's
And number two,
also,
actually.
yeah, and it's also the source of many really what they would call good paying jobs. But now we're seeing Microsoft come in, and what
Mhm.
kind of challenges or nuance does a technology company bring in
Mhm.
how we reskill and
Train.
retool
Mhm.
our workforce when we don't have GEDs
Right.
here?
Well, and that's where, education and training plays such a big role. That's a big part of my career was in the, education, employment, and training arena. And you have to have retraining programs. I mean, I'm so thankful that Microsoft has come here because anytime you can get a premier company like that that's paying family supporting jobs, that will help to train people and will be part of the civic community to help invest in these kinds of training programs. That's a huge win. In fact, I had testified before the Racine County Board on behalf of the governor when they first applied for a permit. And one of the things that was exciting, I met the senior vice president for government affairs for Microsoft, and they said wherever they locate, normally in the last 10 years, two or three other, similar kinds of ventures will locate there. So I'm looking forward to having others come as well. And that's a key area. It's the future. We need to invest in those types of jobs. But we still need manufacturing. We do not
Sure.
want to forget
It's
that. We
and,
want to bring
not an or.
manufacturing
Right. I mean,
back to America, in my
we make
judgment.
things here.
Right,
We make things that get shipped all over the world.
right.
Like it's not just we make things and it gets sold down the street,
Mhm.
right? We make things here that get sold across the world.
Absolutely.
And so speaking about that, because it's trade, right? What do you see as the possible implications um, if President Trump wins
Mhm.
and he can implement these tariffs that he's
Mhm.
talking about? How do you see that
Mhm.
impacting Wisconsin's economy, but also the first congressional
Mhm.
district more specifically?
Well, first of all, tariffs are appropriate in some cases, but to have tariffs across the spectrum, the top economists have estimated that'll cost the middle class about $3,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Think of what I mentioned earlier about 63% of Americans can't survive a $500 hit in an emergency. I mean, that would be disastrous. So I don't think it's a good idea to across the board have that. I think that in selected areas I remember when I was a member of Congress, for instance, in terms of cell phone coverage, Motorola had come to me and they had complained that Japan would not allow our cell phone uh, companies to be able to have operations in Japan. Now, in that case, where they're shutting us out, then that's a different story. Well, then I guess tariffs are important because that way, hopefully,
Can
you
help
guide
even
their
it
policy
more
to even it
balance,
out, and
yeah.
then that causes them to say, well, maybe we shouldn't have that restriction. Maybe we should allow American companies to come here so people can benefit from the latest innovation. And of course, we're an innovation society in America. And of course, Racine was like an innovation leader.
Yeah.
And I love the Tech Prize program that I was
Yeah,
part
isn't that
of,
neat?
bringing back here to
Yeah,
sort of reinstitute that wonderful Racine innovation and promote that and promote entrepreneurship. And, small business is the engine that drives the economy. It's the engine that normally brings forward the most new innovation. And so we want to foster that. So as a member of Congress, I would certainly work closely, can continue to work closely with the Tech Prize group and also on education to make sure we have resources to keep investing in higher education and research and development. As part of the Clinton administration, he had invested heavily in research and development credits for small businesses. That led to 1 million new businesses being incorporated in America. I was very proud to be part of that team.
One of the things that when Heather and we covered the RNC and the DNC,
Mhm.
and we were sitting in on the Moms for Liberty panel discussion around some of the things that they want to see happen within education. One of the things that, and Ron Johnson was there, and so was Scott Walker, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and they were talking about getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education. What are some of your thoughts around that? And what is it? What impact would that have if we didn't have a Department of Education? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it would be a mistake. I mean, in the civil rights era, it was the U.S. Department of Education that really played a big role in promoting, civil rights and having students, integrated schools. But more important than, no, not more, but equally important to that is they play a role in the federal Department of Education to foster innovation, to have certain technical kinds of grants, to make sure we're looking across America and figuring out whether or not we're competitive across the world, because what made America the economic envy of the world was having the best trained workforce, having great innovation and new ideas, and we want to foster that. So here's where I would say I have some degree of agreement with, and that's the idea that we should try to avoid duplication of costs. Like we should make sure that the federal Department of Education is not doing the same thing as the Department of Instruction here in Wisconsin or local school districts, because that's inefficient. So insofar as we want to avoid that, I'm all in. But to get rid of the Department of Education, I think would really hurt in terms of our ability to continue to promote innovation, continue to analyze across America whether or not we're staying competitive, and there's areas where we're lagging. There's no question about it, and we need more initiative in order to make sure that our kids are the best educated in the world, because that's what makes us, as I
It's
indicated.
always the funding, isn't it?
Funding is a big
Funding
part
is
of it, of
always-
course.
Yeah.
But it's not just funding. It's also doing the research and analyzing, where are the gaps and how can we help state departments of education and local school boards to recognize where we have a gap and we need to put more focus. So it's funding, of course, is always critical, but so is having that, that 10,000-foot view and doing the research and providing that kind of critical analysis.
We're going to switch gears just a little bit. We're going to talk about immigration.
Please, yes,
Right. So
very important.
So the state of Wisconsin, in general, population is declining, not by like huge percentages, but it
I was
is.
just looking in Racine County, the 2022 comparison to, I think it was 2010. The percentage of kids under the age of 4 had declined by about 1.5%.
Okay, so then
So
you can
that gives
correlate
you-
that going
yeah.
forward, right?
Sure.
Okay. So the state has a population decline happening. We know that immigrants are crucial for helping fill those gaps, right?
And have been for some time.
And have-
Of course, always.
we
We're a nation
also-
of immigrants.
We are a nation of immigrants. But we also have a huge undocumented population, right?
Right.
And the potential Trump administration is talking about just getting rid of all of them. But not just that, we know that would collapse parts of Wisconsin's economy, but what would that do to us as a nation? Because, as you're in Congress, you're thinking about obviously the first CD, but you have a larger responsibility also, which is the nation.
Absolutely. Well, let me start by saying, because it's one of the things that drove me to run, is that when they decided that here we had an immigration bill, a bipartisan bill that could have easily passed if people like my opponent would have got on board and said, look, we have, James Langford, a very conservative Republican from Oklahoma. We have Kristen Sinema, an independent from Arizona. We have Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, that put together this remarkable bill that was supported by the Border Patrol. And President Biden agreed he would sign it. And it is shameful to me that they were content to wait another year. Now, let me tell you why that's so shameful. And my opponent says I'm for open borders, which is so ridiculous because I made it very clear I'm for that bill. It's a shame he isn't, because that
What
means.
did that bill have, though?
Yeah, let me get to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good question, Dean.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why it was so important. So first of all, let me tell you how it affects people nationwide, but even in my own circle of friends, we have 5 families that we are close to that lost kids to fentanyl. There are 70,000 Americans that die every year from fentanyl. This bill would have provided the resources in order to screen better, in order to process people at the border instead of letting them come into the country before you process them. And that would have been so important. That's why the Border Patrol was enthusiastic about supporting this bill. And so to me,
more agents too,
But
right? It
then they've
increased
given
agents.
exactly
Yeah.
given them the more agents
And
that they
judges.
desperately needed, and more judicial people. Thank you, Denise, to be able to process people there. To me, it's ridiculous. You have people in the country, and they, for 9 months, you have no idea where they are, what they're doing, and then you put off these hearings. The hearings should not be put off. You should be able to determine whether or not are they really subject to persecution in their home country. We have women and children that really have just had horrendous stories because of the persecution in their home country. That's one thing. That's a different matter than people who just want to come here because they want a better life, which I'm not against, but there's a process, and they should follow that same process that my dad followed in order to become an immigrant and become an American citizen. They shouldn't be able to jump the line by coming into this country. So, so to me, the fact that, and my opponent said actually in an interview early in the year, he'd work with anybody to get the deal done. Well, it turns out he worked with nobody, because he said in a town hall meeting in Kenosha this summer, he said, well, no, I'm only for the Republican bill. And we have to have the Republican House bill. And I would maybe tweak that, but that has to be the bill. Well, as long as you say it has to be the Republican bill and Democrats say it has to be a Democratic bill, nothing will ever get done. That means 70,000 more people next year will likely die of fentanyl without any aggressive action and resources that are desperately needed. Now, in terms of mass deportation, to me, it's very clear. I mean, I think that, people who are, anybody that is committed a crime should be deported immediately. Whether they're waiting for, processing, whether they were subject to persecution in their home country, we should have no room in this country for anybody that can't follow the rules. But when you say we're going to just mass deport people, and especially if you're not even going to allow the dreamer kids who have never even lived in any other country, they were born here under our Constitution, they're American citizens, and the idea that they would be deported to a country they never knew, never lived in, that does not make any sense. And certainly, I hope we never again go into family separation, which is totally against American values of humanity and treating people with respect and dignity. That's something that I think is totally outside the pale. So, it seems to me that, and even for police departments, if they had to spend all their time trying to round up, undocumented immigrants in order to deport them all, that will take away from, serious work they have. I have so many friends in the law enforcement field. Art Howell, I talk to regularly. I talk with Commander Jim Farley, who retired from the Kenosha Police Department, and Detective Tom Simons, and so many others. And they're busy. I mean, sadly, they've got their hands full as it is now. If all of a sudden we're going to divert them to just that issue, that would be an issue. That would be a problem.
Yeah.
So you have to have a rational process, but clearly anybody that doesn't follow the laws, I think, should be immediately deported without any,
So
if they're convicted of a crime.
one of the things that I've learned is I talked to Kurt Bauer from the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and he said, he called me from the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, this is this important, Denise. He said, one thing that I need you to understand, the immigration issue has been so over politicized. And he said, this is one of the biggest pain points that I have with the people that I serve as a lobbyist group for business owners that are trying to make their businesses run as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a yin and a yang to this that people are just not really understanding, and the rhetoric doesn't always match what's actually happening.
Right,
How
that's
do we
true.
have productive conversations then? How do we have these conversations and we take the political out of it?
Well, and that's I would say that's one of the biggest differences between my opponent and I. I have worked across the aisle my entire career.
Yeah.
And when I left as Department of Revenue Secretary, you had leading Republicans, chairman of the committees, and others that said Barca gets it. He worked with us. We got a lot done, and we did get a lot done. The last couple of bills we got done, if we have time in the end, I'd like to tell you about, which I think are so important that were done on a bipartisan basis. The Lugar Center, which is named after Senator Lugar, who is a Republican senator, one of the real successful senators that always was bipartisan. They rate people and how bipartisan they are. And sadly, my opponent's not even in the top half. My goal would be to be in the top 10, because I think that's the only way you get things done. And to your point, think about this. I mean, unless you work across the aisle, because we're likely to have divided government again come January. And if you have divided government, unless you work across the aisle, then things do not get done. And that's why, right now I don't know anybody that I talk to that doesn't agree with a do nothing dysfunctional House of Representatives. They can't even keep a speaker in the chair. We have a farm bill 2 years in a row. We're a agricultural based state. We're the dairy state, for God's sakes. And now here we go the second year in a row without a farm bill. That hurts our farmers. It hurts our agricultural economy. We have to have people of goodwill that get the idea that success is when you work together and you actually pass something. My opponent put in his brochure, one of his successes is immigration. How is that a success? We're floundering in this country, and we had a bipartisan deal that could have passed, and they were content to wait a year to even bring it up. And come January, if we still have divided government, we'll go another year as long as people have that attitude. It has to be the Republican bill, it has to be the Democratic bill.
So one of the things that I think is interesting that maybe a lot of people don't remember is that under the Clinton presidency, with a Republican House and Senate, we had a balanced budget.
Yeah.
For like the first time.
First time since John F. Kennedy, and the last time, sadly, we've not balanced the budget since. In fact, for me, that was something I was very proud of because, the National Taxpayers Union, which is the only one that ranks every vote, I was rated the most fiscally conservative Democrat in the country. Why is that? Because I thought, my God, I can't saddle our kids with $350 billion in debt, and now it's trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, you look at tax policy. And, they want to give the top 1% huge tax breaks again. To me, it costs a lot less and it's far more effective. Let's give the middle class a tax relief. That actually stimulates the economy because what my economists tell me, the Department of Revenue, that trickles through the economy 3.5 times if you give middle class tax relief and those struggling to get in the middle class. But we had ballooned the deficit the last time they did a tax bill where they actually lowered the corporate rate below what the U.S. Chamber said was prudent. Now, I thought it was a good idea to lower the tax rate to bring more investment back to America, but why would you go even further than what the experts are telling you need to do? That's a huge mistake, and it's not affordable. It's not sustainable, and that's why we have just so much red ink. It's unbelievable. And, we need to have, a meaningful conversation. We need to have a plan that'll bring us back into balance. Just like we did, back when President Clinton was in office.
So let's talk about how we get things done and like that, how you have productive conversations and what does that actually look like if you are in office? Because it's not just you, it's the whole group that is dealing with this, but do we expect as voters to, when we have Republicans only have Republican agendas, is that a problem with voters, or is that, how are we, you know what I mean?
Right.
Go with me on this because I haven't had enough coffee.
Well, no, it's an important point, and the point is that
our expectations as voters not aligned with reality of how we get.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to like, how do you square if you do like a first CD survey, right? Constituents come back and say, we support the legalization of marijuana, we support legal abortion, blah, blah, blah. And I know that you're probably for both of those things potentially, but what if there's a topic that you actually are like, I don't really feel like that. So like, how do you square that and then continue forward with working to get things done?
Well, first of all, surveys are important to get a sense of where the community and where the citizens would like to go. And rarely is it so prescriptive down to, the nth degree. I think that's why they trust, the goal is to be able to have, people who represent you that you feel you can trust that they will represent the general direction you want to go in. But obviously to get anything done, Democrats wouldn't get everything they want, Republicans wouldn't get everything they want, Independents wouldn't get everything they want. That's what compromise is about in order to achieve a goal. But you have to stay focused on what are we trying to achieve, and are we actually moving the needle to achieve it, whether it's a farm bill, whether or not women's reproductive rights are at stake, whether it's healthcare policy. You have to have a sense of what do they want to achieve there, and then how can I play a role. I always worked across the aisle as a member of Congress, certainly in the legislature. Even when I was first elected to the legislature, Tony Earl was governor. The Democrats controlled both houses. And many of the bills I passed have Republican sponsors. Now, I didn't need to. I was actually a leader virtually my entire legislative career, but like a bill for disabled adults to be able to get contracts with the state. I worked on that with Carol Bittner, who really became Rosler from Oshkosh, and we developed a very close friendship and partnership. So then we were able to work on other things together. In Congress, I did the same thing. In fact, Congressman Chris Shays from Connecticut, who's a Republican, endorsed me for my election here because they know I will be a person that will work across the aisle in order to get things done. And it takes that kind of spirit in developing relationships. When I was on the floor in the House, as we were taking votes and you're waiting to speak, I would go sit on the Republican side of the aisle. I would talk to people like Dan Burton, who were very conservative, just to get a feel for where are you trying to go here? Would you ever support this? Well, how could we ever get something done on economic development that Democrats and Republicans could come together? I was trying to help, Secretary Ron Brown when we developed development zones, or maybe they're opportunity zones. That we've had so many different changes.
Yeah.
I think back then they were development zones, and later they became opportunity zones. But nonetheless, that's the spirit you need to have, though. That you need to establish that dialogue with people. I had that dialogue with Kingston, very conservative from Georgia.
But is it also about trust? Like
It is.
it's not just the trust. Oftentimes, because we now have almost 30,000 people that like our page on Facebook, right? And we have about 180,000 people that come to the site.
That's fantastic.
It is.
Yeah.
11 years.
Oh my God, Denise and Heather, you should feel so proud of that.
We are.
It's wonderful. I love it. I think it's terrific.
But like, I'll give you an example, okay, of this, what I'm talking about when I'm saying this in my head, right? So I'm sitting at the event for Tim Wells the other day, and I'm in the press pool, and I took a photo and I posted it, and somebody's like, "Oh, well, that's just an AI photo. It's not real." And I'm like,
We're literally here.
I'm like, so we have these conversations of whether things are real versus what's happening here.
Right.
And so there's that critical thinking that I think it is really missing from the conversations that voters have, also of understanding the nuance of story. So like an example would be the immigration pieces. When I'm talking to Kurt Bauer, and he's like, and this is a very fiscally conservative guy.
Yes.
Right? He is saying we'll work with anybody that can get this done, and we really need this.
Right.
So why is it that it's not happening?
Well, let me say this, Denise. Perfect example. I had lunch with Kurt Bauer about a year and a half ago on this very topic. And, sadly, WMC almost exclusively supports Republicans. In fact, I think they do exclusively at this juncture, which is sad because years ago, they would work with both sides. But nonetheless, that didn't stop me from having lunch with him, understanding his perspective, seeing how we could work together to get things done. You have to have those dialogues. It's so important. But you said the critical word, though, Denise, and it's trust. I mean, and I know my opponent's spending, millions of dollars to say you can't trust Peter Barca. And to me, it's just so laughable because I would not have had the success I had working with Republicans in the Department of Revenue the last 5.25 years, or working with Robin Voss, the speaker, to get critical things done that we need to accomplish for the state. Now, we didn't agree with, we probably disagree almost as much as my wife and I disagree sometimes on policy. But the issue is we did work together to get, a civil dialogue. We worked together on study committees. We worked together, take the Bucks deal. The only way we get that done, he said, you get half the votes, I'll get half the votes. Well, he had to trust that I actually was going to go and do that. And, and that trust is so vital. And, but I'll tell you, just one thing I have to insert before we're done, because the one that rankles me more than anything is my opponent has a provision saying that, that Peter Barca has a group that sides with him that says he wants to defund the police. Now, I don't know what group he's even talking about, but I helped to get 100,000 new police officers in Wisconsin. I lost a very good friend who was going to marry my cousin in the line of duty. So then I passed survivor benefits. Me and Senator Van Wangard and John Spiro, Selena Taylor gathered together so that people of fallen officers would have benefits for their families. It's just like so sad that people stoop to that level. when they know there's absolutely not a shred of truth to that. I mean, and that's where it gets into trust. He'll say, well, I'll to be fair to him, I'll say what he said about me. He said, well, I said he didn't support IVF, and he claims he does. Well, he's part of a study committee. I'm not part of that study, a Republican study committee that wants personhood. If you have personhood, you would not have IVF. Now, he supported some meaningless resolution saying IVF may be useful, but he's not a sponsor of the bill. There's a Democrat and a Republican bill that would assure that we could have IVF. So sign the bill. Let's get it done. If we all agree, which presumably people say they agree, well, then there should be no delay. And, so to me, that's what's said on trust is so vital. And I take that so seriously. I work hard every single day, whether I'm in public office or in civic life, to earn that trust. And I take great pride that that's why I've always gotten 75% of the vote in the Kenosha Racine area when I represented in the legislature, roughly 75%.
So we only have like 3 minutes
Yes,
left.
okay.
So,
I understand.
yeah,
I wish we had another hour. I love
that.
this. I like this kind of civil dialogue.
But you wanted to talk specifically about a couple of things that you got done as Secretary of Revenue.
Yes. Well, let me talk about, first of all, we focus, like I'm talking about, tax policy on the middle class. And we got $1.5 billion in tax relief for middle class people. And that was very significant because it was during the pandemic when people needed help the most. Mm-hmm. And we're number one in the country in terms of our returning proportionately our dollars to help small businesses, nonprofit organizations, individuals. But the last two bills were bills I'm very proud of because as a revenue secretary, I oversaw law enforcement officers for alcohol, tobacco, and gaming. And they would tell me how we'd have kids regularly end up in the emergency room because they would try vaping and there would be toxic substance in there. So on a bipartisan basis, we worked together to pass a bill that in order to have products on a shelf for any place, it has to be a registered product that we know does not have toxic substances in it. But the most important of all was the last bill he signed, and that has to do with organ transplant. So Michigan was the first state in the union that used the tax system for people that donate organs. Now the DMV does a wonderful job. We just want to help augment that so that we have one more vehicle. And I'm an organ donor myself. I encourage people to be. Oh, you are? Oh my God! Wow, wow, that's terrific. And it's so vital. It saves people's lives. In fact, we lost a nephew tragically at 16 years of age in a water skiing accident. And the thing they wanted, my brother and sister wanted more than anything was to have, his organs or something to help somebody else. And part of that did get achieved, which I know brought them some solace. But the UW organ transplant program, after the governor signed the bill, there are 4 of them there, and they said, Secretary Barca, you tell your team that I don't know if they're going to save hundreds or thousands of lives in the next 5 years in Wisconsin, but they are definitely saving lives. And to me, that just warmed me. And again, bipartisan basis, getting it done. Now, my IT director said, but you ruined my shtick, Peter. He said, I used to tell my staff, what we do here is very important, but we're not saving lives. He said, I can't say that anymore. I said, Rick, I'm glad to take away that shtick from you.
It's funny that ironic that you bring this up because one of my dear friends, her sister, there's an exchange process now for organ donation. So her husband needs a kidney. She donated a kidney to a complete stranger, and then that puts him higher on the list to receive a kidney from somebody else in the exchange.
Oh, that's I never heard that. Thank you for sharing that, Denise.
I am going to be writing
That's very interesting.
And so her and her family have been part of my life for a very long time. And so I saw her on Sunday morning and I said, we have to do that story, but not until after the election.
Yeah. Too many other things to cover.
Right. So Peter, thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
We appreciate you so much for stopping by and spending time with us. And thanks to everybody. If you watch this, good afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you catch it. But thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate what you're doing here. I mean, it's very important because then your followers can figure out who these people are. What do they value? How do they approach their job? What are they trying to achieve for people? And then they can make independent judgments versus these ridiculous ads that are just absolutely unbelievable.
Well, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go turn the camera off. Hold on one second. Go do that.
What a beautiful studio.